The 11th entry in our continuing series of the great movies is the best buddy movie ever made, Midnight Run.
Criminal. Oh, no, come on. Cigarettes are killers.
Why are we running away from the FBI?
Because I gotta bring it back myself, otherwise I won't get my money.
They can't fly. They also suffer from acrophobia and claustrophobia.
I'll tell you what, if you don't cooperate, you're gonna suffer from fistophobia.
They're seeing America the hard way.
Why would you eat that?
Doesn't taste good.
At gunpoint.
What did you do before you did this? What qualified you for this?
He's gaining.
No kidding. He's flying. Of course he's gaining.
Robert De Niro.
It is truly in your best interest to just relax.
I'm totally relaxed.
Charles Grodin.
$2, that's all you're gonna leave? That's 15%.
That's 13%. These people depend on tips for a living.
From the director of Beverly Hills Cop, Midnight Run.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The 11th entry in our ongoing series simply titled The Great Movies. And this is the first film on the list that has any significant comedic elements. The movie in question is now 36 years old, and for the very specific genre of what is commonly referred to as a buddy movie, to give you an example, Beverly Hills Cop would be considered a buddy movie, Rush Hour, Lethal Weapon. In the realm of buddy movies, I believe that this is the finest, most compulsively rewatchable, and just purely enjoyable buddy movie ever made. It would be Martin Brest's 1988 incredible Midnight Run. And when you make these kinds of films, in Hollywood, they're often referred to by producers as a 1-2, where you have one's of this and one's of that. A one's a movie, that's the other kind of funny way. So, well, one's a cop, one's a crook. Midnight Run follows, to some extent, the idea of one's a cop, one's a crook. In the case of this film, Robert De Niro, who was incredibly active in the 80s and all throughout the 90s, it's like the guy never stopped working. So De Niro was just coming off of Angel Heart. He had made The Mission with Roland Joffe the previous year, and he did Jackknife with Ed Harris and Kathy Baker just before starting to shoot Midnight Run. He was very busy. He was just like a whirling dervish, the guy. And that's kind of in keeping with what we know about him. He's very restless, doesn't really like to do interviews, but he's very restless and always needs to be in motion. Kind of like Sylvester Stallone. In that regard, Stallone can't sit still, and it seems that De Niro does not like, and even as a much younger man in his early to mid 40s, doesn't like idle time, just sitting around and doing nothing. So Robert De Niro in the film Midnight Run plays a former Chicago cop who is now a bounty hunter. Now the following year, Clint Eastwood played a bounty hunter in a movie called Pink Cadillac, which was not successful. It was also a buddy movie, only in that case, one's a bounty hunter, or skip tracer as it was called in that film, and one's a criminal on the run, even though she really isn't a criminal, Bernadette Peters. But De Niro plays a bounty hunter who works for a loan shark in Vegas. And he had been a Chicago police officer. And we realize relatively early in the story that he got run out of the Chicago Police Department because he would not allow himself to be paid off. He would not turn a blind eye to crime being committed in broad daylight, serious financial crimes, and mob level stuff. So he was run out of the Chicago Police Department. It cost him his marriage, and he had to watch the guy who ended up marrying his wife be promoted to captain. So he has multiple axes to grind. But as we meet Jack Walsh, he's just trying to make an honest living, even doing something as rough and tumble as being a bounty hunter, skip tracer, whatever you want to call it. And so he is tasked by the great Joey Pants himself, Joe Pantoliano, who plays Eddie Moscone, who is the bail bondsman that De Niro's character typically works for. He has a white-collar criminal that Jack Walsh De Niro's character, he knows who this guy is. This isn't a random, oh, you need to pick up so-and-so. Well, who is he? He knows who this is. And the white-collar criminal he's picking up is a CPA who more or less turned state's evidence against the mob named Jonathan Mardukas. And that's who he has to pick up and transport from New York back to Vegas. And so Mardukas is played by an extraordinary comic actor, Charles Grodin. And this is another one of those pairings of a 1-2. You wouldn't automatically assume that they would make movie magic. But in much the same way as the previous year's seemingly cockeyed casting of Danny Glover and Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, sometimes two entirely different performance styles just work perfectly. And so Jack Walsh travels to pick up the Duke, and the Duke basically was working for the same mob outfit that De Niro ran or was forced out of Chicago. It's all connected. Like, none of this is accidental. And he thought he was working for a legitimate firm. And when he realized that he was basically the mob accountant, he rebelled. And he stole an enormous amount of stolen money, basically, donated it all to charity, and then parachuted out, was picked up by the cops. Now he, Jonathan Mardukas, is pretty sure he's going to be assassinated. He's supposed to get set up to be in a witness protection program, but he's pretty confident, I'm going to be dead in a couple of hours. So he obviously is going to try to escape at every turn. And so Jack Walsh is in a very negative situation, a very unusual situation in that, under normal circumstances, if he's offered, I'm going to give you $100,000 to bring this guy across country, well, he's going to take it without hesitation. It's a shit ton of money, even now, but especially in 1988, that's how high value of a target this Jonathan Mardukas is, because everybody is looking for him or is going to be looking for him. But Jack Walsh's problem is that he has a conscience, and the same issue that held him up in Chicago, that kept him from living a more extravagant lifestyle, just going along, just getting with the program, he's not that guy. And he is clearly troubled. As much as he can talk tough, and there's a lot of bluster, he doesn't like the fact that this guy, who is basically a hero, is probably going to be bumped off. And I guess if somebody has to turn him in, it might as well be me. And maybe I can take this money and open up, as he puts it, a nice little coffee shop. So you have these two characters in opposition. And there have been certain buddy films where the tension between the two, typically the two guys, is overplayed. This movie doesn't do that, because we get an idea from early on that each guy in his own way respects the other. But Jonathan Mardukas is played so beautifully by Charles Grodin. He's the sort of personality that would always want to interact with people and always want to try to get along with people. Whereas Jack Walsh is angry and he doesn't really want to get to know this guy. And one of the reasons why he doesn't want to get to know him is he might start to sympathize and empathize even more, because he admits, and this is something that it shows the nature of his character, because he could have said something else. When he's asked by Mardukas, when you read about me in the papers, were you on my side? And he could say, I thought you were a piece of shit then, but instead he goes, yeah, I was. Well, why not now? He says, well, now you're in my way. I need to return you, and I want to get my fucking money. So without going into spoiler-heavy, plot-heavy territory, you have what amounts to a road movie. The comedic version of this, full-on comedy, could be seen as the previous year's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, where in that film, Steve Martin has the kind of De Niro character in the sense that he gets laughs because he's always at the end of his rope. He's always angry. He's enraged. And John Candy in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles just wants to be liked. He wants to interact. He wants to get to know this person that is bringing him back, or bringing him, returning him to justice. It's not enough to just sit around and let's just take a trip to Vegas. He wants to engage. And in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it's a huge part of the film that Steve Martin's stuck with this guy. He doesn't want to talk to him. Let's just get where we're going and get the fuck away from one another. And Jack Walsh, the more time he spends with Jonathan Mardukas, the more you can sense that he empathizes and understands. But the thing is, with the Duke, and this was also a concept that came up in the movie Twins, if somebody knows exactly how much money you're supposed to have, well, they know how much money you have. But what if they don't know? What if there's only speculation? What if it turns out that you actually have more or took more than was previously reported? In the movie Twins, there's kind of a comedic twist towards the end of the film where Arnold Schwarzenegger thinks that he and Danny DeVito recovered $4 million. What if they recovered more than $4 million? Then what do you do? So in the world of this film, as much as he's a bit of an asshole, and he kind of treats Jonathan Mardukas a little bit unfairly, and he's a little bit rougher than he probably needs to be, there is a sense that this guy is a shining knight. He's not even a dark knight. He's a shining knight. Yes, he'll use whatever methods necessary to get the job done, but he is not corruptible. He's not going to just take a payoff. And there is a moment early in the film, no spoilers, where the Duke offers Jack Walsh, it sounds like he's offering him a bribe. And the way that De Niro, what he does with his face, and the way that he, as Jack Walsh, parries what could be a genuine offer, we really don't have any idea if it is. It informs the way that the Duke relates to him for the rest of the film. It's like, okay, that approach isn't going to work. This guy is true blue. If I just stuck $300,000 in his paw after making a getaway, I don't think that he would just let me go. So Jack Walsh goes through all of these ups and downs and all of these travails of trying to transport his prisoner to Vegas so he can be processed and booked. And we, as the audience, understand that what Jonathan Mardukas is saying about the fact that as soon as I get to Vegas, I'm going to be dead inside of an hour. He's not just talking. He's not just being pessimistic. And he's not necessarily speaking from experience, but he's speaking from the sense that the guy that I stole this money from, the head of this mob outfit, he's not going to let me live long enough to get into any witness protection program. So he tries to play on Jack Walsh's better nature. He's using very old-fashioned psychology, basically saying, yes, you're going to get your money, but you understand you're turning me over to be executed. That's going to be on your conscience. Or as he says, as only Charles Grodin, what an amazing, wonderful actor he was. But after all of that, he goes with a smile, I hope it's a wonderful coffee shop, Jack. And he says it with sincerity, and that makes it even more difficult for Jack Walsh to handle. As much as he tries to continue to keep him at an arm's length, keep threatening him, he also realizes fairly early on just how resourceful this guy is. This guy might be an accountant, he might be a pencil pusher, but there's a lot more going on than just a pencil pusher who kind of fucked around and lucked into a lot of money. But the idea from the Duke that he will be bumped off almost immediately. We meet the crime boss, Serrano, who is connected to the reason why Jack Walsh left Chicago. That this is the guy. So both men, although they're in opposition, they have a common enemy, Jimmy Serrano. And Jimmy Serrano in this film is played by the late, great Dennis Farina in what I believe to be perhaps the most unsung, incredible villain performance of the last 40 years. Because there are certain villain performances when you're a cineast or a film geek like me that everybody talks about. For example, Alan Rickman in Die Hard. If you want to say Alan Rickman in Harry Potter, I don't really think that qualifies. But Alan Rickman in Die Hard, to me, for this kind of movie, is like the gold standard. Dennis Farina, as Jimmy Serrano, in this film, is electric. And he played a similar role in Get Shorty 7 years later. But Get Shorty is a film that has an even more comedic bent than Midnight Run. And although his character is technically a crime boss there too. It's just pitched at a different angle. But Farina in this film is terrifying. It's almost like he's giving a performance out of a horror film where he's a mad slasher, except he's a crime boss in a $50,000 hand-cut Armani suit and wearing a $100,000 Rolex, and not a hair is out of place. He is absolutely fire in this role. And no more than a minute of screen time with him, and we know, yeah, the Duke is dead. He's gonna die, and he's probably gonna die a very, very bad death, if there is such a thing as a good death. So these plot threads all come together, and well, Jack Walsh is in trouble with the feds for impersonating an FBI agent. That's a whole other unbelievably often hilarious plot thread. But becomes a question of, if Jack Walsh is able to figure out a way to wriggle free from Serrano and Serrano's henchmen and his former friend, a fellow bounty hunter, played by the fantastic John Ashton from the Beverly Hills Cop movies, if he's able to wriggle free of him, if he is able to somehow evade and keep his charge here, his mark, from getting bumped off before he collects his money. But is he really going to? Is he really going to end up turning this guy over so he can just be killed? Or is there a third option? Is there a way where he can do right by his conscience and do right by this guy who behaved in a very noble way in Jonathan Mardukas? And how the hell is he just not going to go to jail, go to prison for impersonating an FBI agent? Well, the movie figures it all out. And as much as De Niro has these moments of agitation, which are very funny because it's him, especially that era him, and moments of broad humor, because he and Grodin, a lot of their dialogue was ad-libbed. Again, De Niro's not known as that kind of a performer. Some are. He's not really known as a big ad-lib. This isn't Robin Williams up there. But Grodin pushed him. And the two guys had a great relationship. They were friends, and there was always a lot of talk that there was going to be a sequel. The movie was a box office hit. It made about 2.5 times its production cost. And Grodin even joked, 1990, 91, whenever he went on a talk show to promote a film, whether it was Mr. Destiny, whether it was Taking Care of Business, whether it was Beethoven, he was always asked, are you doing a sequel to Midnight Run? Charles Grodin is such an interesting character. For those who only know him a little bit, he plays the good doctor in Rosemary's Baby, but he was such a character. He had a talk show for many years, MSNBC, and I know at certain points he worked for MSN. But Grodin wrote an autobiography about his adventures in the screen trade. And the final stories that he tells in that autobiography are about Midnight Run and the experience of not only making the film, but of working with somebody who he acknowledged this is one of the most talented people to ever work in the medium. This is he's not just a terrific thespian, but the preparation. Like, he doesn't leave anything, no stone unturned, nothing left to chance. So there's a sequence in the film, this isn't really a spoiler, where the two guys end up on what amount to rapids. And they're not in a boat. They have to somehow navigate through twisty, swirling, tornado-y, cyclone-y water while not getting cut to ribbons by rocks. And they need to somehow do this. And the initial idea, Martin Brest and whoever was connected to the production that was actually in communication, now everything is done like this. This would have been in 15 seconds, they would have gotten an answer. They wanted to just use stuntmen. They were going to do close-up shots, and they filmed the close-up shots of De Niro and Grodin because their characters are not exactly together in this very important scene in the film. So they did what would be called pickups, and then they were going to use stuntmen for the faraway shots and as best as possible try to match it so that it looked like it was really the guys doing the stunt. De Niro, 42, 43, maybe he was 44, but still somebody who did not want to automatically go to a stuntman. De Niro looked at, according to Grodin's recollection, he said, Bobby looked at me and he said, I want to give this a crack. Don't call in the stuntman. I think I can do this. everyone on the crew, they're kind of looking, oh, fuck. Because they didn't think that he could do it. So De Niro, with safety harness, with divers right there, and this was not, 1,000 feet away. Everyone was very close. De Niro goes into the water and he attempts to navigate the scene, and he still almost drowns. So they fish him out of there, and he's embarrassed, and he's all wet. They're toweling him off. No, I'm okay. He's not angry. He's a little embarrassed. So according to Charles Grodin, De Niro didn't say, okay, I can't do this. When they finished toweling him off, with the slightest outline of a smile on his face, De Niro looked at me and he said, I don't recommend Chuck try this shot. And then everybody cracked up laughing, and they ended up using the stuntmen. So without spoiling it, the film does climax in Las Vegas. It does have this unbelievable showdown with the FBI, organized crime, Jack Walsh, Jonathan Mardukas. And you just keep saying to yourself, how do they get out of this? And one of the great things with fiction, and with movies in particular, when you talk about a 3-act structure, they say the first act, put your hero up in a tree. Second act, throw a lot of rocks at him. Third act, figure out how to get him down. Well, this movie follows that very, very well. Because the first act, he picks up Charles Grodin's Jonathan Mardukas, and the Duke is well prepared and fucks with him to such an extent and for so long, and there were so many other people involved. It's like everybody's just throwing rocks at Jack Walsh and he can't get down from the tree. This incredible, intense, interwoven sequence of all of these plot threads coming together at once in Las Vegas McCarran Airport. Just unbelievable. And the way the film wraps up, I don't want to say that it's necessarily an open ending, but it's not the ending that you see coming, even though it is kind of foreshadowed. It's kind of telegraphed, but not in the obvious way. And there's nothing wrong with sometimes it being an obvious way, like the end of Lethal Weapon, which I think is touching, where Mel Gibson rings on Danny Glover's door, Martin Riggs, Roger Murtaugh, and he simply hands Roger Murtaugh's daughter, Rianne, a bullet. He just hands her a bullet and says, just tell him I won't need it. And what that means in the world of that film is that Martin Riggs now has a reason to live. That's all. He has a reason to live. Well, in this movie, because of events that have taken place, there is an exchange between Charles Grodin and Robert De Niro that De Niro's character, sure as fuck, didn't see coming. But he has, to the last, behaved up here. He has behaved as a guy with enormous integrity, incorruptible, and that is how the final exchange, the final handshake, if you will, between these two rivals, frenemies by the end of the movie, how it goes. And I remember the film critic Roger Ebert talking about it, and he absolutely loved this movie, and so did Gene Siskel for that matter. But Ebert said, Charles Grodin is mostly known for being funny. He's a great comic actor. But this movie has scenes where he is every bit De Niro's equal. He's not racing to catch up. He's not from behind like, I can't, this guy is just too good. He said, there are moments in this film where it's Grodin, the film comic. He gets the lump in the throat, not Mr. De Niro. And it is just an incredible film. The best buddy movie ever made. And if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, this is an action comedy. That's the genre. That's how they would describe it. Action comedy, a buddy film, a buddy action comedy. It's at 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is as high a score as this kind of film could possibly get. Lethal Weapon wouldn't be that high. Beverly Hills Cop wouldn't be anywhere near that high. 48 Hours, Rush Hour. This is a movie that is so good within what appears to be a limiting genre. It somehow elevates to the category of high art. And for those who haven't seen it and are interested, it is actually streaming on Netflix as we speak. So If you get Netflix, you can fire it up and you can find out for yourself, do I know what I'm talking about with regards to this movie? Or is maybe it just doesn't play anymore? But I say that it does. And this was one of my father's 10 favorite films. He must have seen it 30 times. I'm not exaggerating. He would, the sort of guy, a little bit like his son, where he would be reciting the dialogue along with the characters. He got such a kick out of this movie, out of the performances. He was actually the one who, he bought Charles Grodin's autobiography and read it to me. Excuse me, not read it to me. He read it and then I read it because based off of his recommendation. Grodin's autobiography is called It Would Be So Nice If You Weren't Here. And I'll tell you the story behind that title before closing the episode. Grodin, again, an immense character when he wasn't making movies. When he was on TV, he was funny. Grodin was shooting a movie in the late 70s called 11 Harrow House, not far from where Queen Elizabeth lived, like not far from Buckingham Palace. It was somewhere in that range, like off to the countryside. And it was shooting scenes in this manor house, this crazy palatial estate. And he said, I'm not sure whether it was the Duke of Kent. He said, I don't remember who it was, but somebody of that level connected to the royal family. This was their estate. So Grodin, before they got there, he asked everybody every question. Are we allowed to explore the house? What are we supposed to do? Do we have to stay in a certain room? And he was told, you can go wherever you want. Don't steal anything, but go wherever you want. There's no restriction that have been placed upon us. We asked those questions. Don't worry about it. Just, you got some time, you walk around. So Grodin, during a break in filming, as they're trying to get set up, they had about a half hour, and he knew he had at least a half hour. So Chuck, as he was usually called, Chuck took a walk in this unbelievable house, this incredible mansion. And he opened the door and he was just in awe of this library. It looked like 17th century architecture and rows and rows and rows of dusty books and brandy and cigars, just what you would imagine. And he was just genuflect and he just couldn't believe where he was. And he said, I kind of forgot myself for a moment. I'm just staring at these shelves and these books. And I was going to take a little sniffer and have a little brandy when all of a sudden I see there's a woman, a very regal-looking older woman who was probably in her mid-70s, had just entered the room and she's staring at me. And suddenly I remembered who I was and what I was doing here. And I looked at this woman and I said, oh, ma'am, I'm sorry. They told us that we were allowed to look at the house and explore. She says, oh, okay, young man. He said, well, is it all right that I'm in here? And the old lady looked at him and said, there's nothing wrong with it, young man, but it would be so nice if you weren't here. Hence the title of Charles Grodin's autobiography. It would be so nice if you weren't here. Midnight Run, released in July of 1988, directed by Martin Brest, starring Charles Grodin, Robert De Niro, Joe Pantoliano, John Ashton, and a fire Dennis Farina. Number 11 in our ongoing series of the great movies. This has been episode 302 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday morning with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or any of the others upon which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.